Welcome to our Rapid Fire Wednesday Q&A for corporate immigration professionals. I'm Kimberley Robidoux, partner in San Diego, and I'm joined with Miki Matrician, co-managing partner of WR Immigration's Boston office. It's great to see you, Miki.
Hi, Kim. It was so good to see you in Chicago for that week-long annual conference.
It was a lot of fun. You get a bunch of immigration attorneys together and there's no stopping us.
Exactly. So for today's installment of our Rapid Fire Wednesdays, we have gotten questions about the impact of global elections, especially the U.S. presidential election, on immigration. So for U.S. elections, HR and global mobility professionals are needing to anticipate changes in the immigration policies, and it's really the presidential elections and the congressional balance between the two political parties that is going to have an impact on these changes. So, regardless of what happens with the elections, we should anticipate change. We are expecting, more complex, more demands for evidence and increased processing times. And of course, the increased and confusing USCIS fees that went into effect April 1st of this year, and we're still trying to get used to those. So immigration is also a big issue in the elections of 8 of the world's 10 most populous nations, including the UK. And migration has its own economic dynamics that politicians have no control over. And the reality today is that there are massive refugee situations in many areas around the world. So let's start with that. Let's start with global migration. What are some of the issues with elections, Kimberley?
Yeah, so as we were talking earlier, Miki, this is kind of a heavy topic, right? There's a lot of stuff, if I can call it that we're kind of noodling our way through right now. And it was one of the topics that kind of filtered throughout the entire Immigration Lawyers Association conference, just planning for what to do with changes in the global perspective, not just our U.S. elections. But first, in general, anti-immigrant sentiments seem to be increasing, not only in the U.S., but in many countries around the world, as there is an increase in migrants that are fleeing war-torn regions, as well as unstable political landscapes. They're leaving those locations to go to more developed countries. We're also seeing more conservative candidates that focus on protectionist measures, which are, those individuals are actually being elected in some countries. So with economic decline breeds protectionism, which in turn results in restrictive policies. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that results in further economic downturn because of a labor shortage with people who are leaving their home country, so to speak. Second, this phenomenon gives rise to a perception that immigration fuels crime, which brings back more anti-immigrant sentiment and electoral fodder, which we're seeing definitely throughout the world and various countries. So one of the things that we were looking into, we found that the World Bank estimates that the overall impact of economic immigration in Malaysia on crime suggests that immigration actually has little effect. And then we also found a U.S. Department of Justice study on Texas migration, which found that U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes than immigrants. Also, U.S.-born citizens are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes than migrants. So the reality is that undocumented migrants particularly want to keep their heads down to avoid arrest and being flagged for deportation. And, I see that on the southern border here, in San Diego. There's a huge migrant population, and the crimes that I see that are from across the TV are not typically with migrants. They're with our own U.S. citizens or permanent residents, potentially. The other thing that we see is that birth rates are declining in many countries, which means they would need to turn to immigrants to fill the labor gap. So, for instance, Australia has a net migration over the past decade that has averaged about 250,000 annually. And the issue of illegal migrants and asylum seekers remains a hot political issue in Australia, even though the numbers are rather small. So the issue, as in other countries, is less immigration per se than the perception and the degree of government control over the numbers and the source of what's being told to people. So for our global mobility partners, with more restrictive governments abroad, it may create significant issues with transferring key employees abroad, especially employees that identify as LGBTQ+. Specifically, if more conservative governments are voted into power, there will likely be more restrictive policies that could place an employee in danger. That affects not only the employee's career, but also the company with respect to the success of the business operations. So it's not just the change in administration potentially, but some of the laws that are being enacted in other countries that are becoming more restrictionist that will have an impact. So our recommendation is to start now to have an alternative plan, or at least think through some policies in the event that there are election results abroad that could impact which employees would be able to travel for business, for short-term work assignments, for long-term work assignments, as well as potential repatriations back to the US or to someone's home country if it's not the US. And also, would some employees want to leave their home countries to work abroad at other countries if their government becomes more restrictionist and has more restrictive policies? So we have a very strong global group with our partner, Audrey, that is staying on top of political issues that could come up as a result of elections abroad, and has been and will continue to assist organizations and individuals to obtain the visas that are needed for employees in order to be transferred to other company locations for various reasons if needed. So that was a lot to start our Rapid Fire Wednesday, just kind of given the backdrop there. And with that, I'm going to break into something a little bit more specific. So Miki, this was in the news years and years ago, and it finally came into fruition. So what about Brexit in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, definitely. Let's not forget about Brexit. I mean, Brexit was a result of an election that really saw immigration as a factor in that narrow vote that brought that about. I mean, even though immigration was the main factor, most EU migrants that caused this concern were really temporary workers. Most migrant settlers in the UK were from outside Europe, right, which is still the case today. And the loss of freedom of movement within the EU to the UK increased demand for labor, especially for workers from Asia and Africa, to fill a need to care for an aging population. And so this year is going to be the first general election in the UK since leaving the EU, and it's at a time when immigration has been central to electoral politics. And Brexit's implications for immigration policy still remains, a topic that British policymakers really don't want to acknowledge. And so during the recent European parliamentary elections, anti-immigrant sentiment really was one of the several factors that helped far-right parties in a few countries, including France, Germany, and Italy, win more seats in the legislature. And so, in recent years, politicians really have learned that leaving one of the world's largest economic blocs has not only damaged the UK economy, but it's really definitely not a panacea for the country's immigration challenges either. I mean, the elections in the UK could definitely move the government's immigration policy in one direction or the other. And overall, country by country, variations in labor supply and demand is going to determine actual movements, and as well as religion, which becomes a political issue too. So I just want to turn now, Kimberley, to U.S. presidential elections. Can you make a prediction as to, what kind of changes we can anticipate if President Biden is reelected? I know we definitely want to talk about Donald Trump's potential administration as a potential outcome, but let's start with Biden first. While we can expect sort of more of the same of what we saw starting in 2020 to now, but I think we are expecting some changes upcoming. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, we have been talking a lot about Biden continuing on, or, a Trump 1.2 administration. So let's focus first with if we have a continuation of the Biden administration. As you said, there are going to be changes, right? It's not going to stay stagnant. So for our global mobility and immigration partners, we expect that there will be further expansions of legal pathways to work permits and permanent residence for certain groups. So as the Biden administration announced on Tuesday, it will provide protections for undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation and provide them with a work permit. There will also be a path to permanent residence, which, people have been waiting a really long time for something like this. So because we've been waiting a really long time, the population is expected to impact about 500,000 people. So it's a fair number of people in the US. We expect this new program to roll out after it's published in the Federal Register later this summer. So we'll have more details as more information is gathered. So the Biden administration does understand the positive impact of immigration to the economy and will likely continue along the path of expanding these legal pathways.
Yeah, and I have clients who, employ workers under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So that's DACA for short, and also known as Dreamers. So this is great news for a lot of companies, as well as, obviously families and individuals, right? Can you tell us about what we can expect on the employment-based options too?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we are expecting is an expansion of work permits for children of some temporary workers, right? You have some temporary workers who are in H-1B status. They might keep getting their extensions beyond that 6-year maximum. And as they continue in their career with the extensions beyond their 6-year maximum, their children keep getting bigger and bigger, right? So there might be some work permits for those children as well as other temporary workers' children. And then it could also impact certain workers in the agriculture field and healthcare field. So those are some of the expansions we are keeping an eye out on. The other thing that we wanted to also look at is that based on, President Biden's emphasis on artificial intelligence, AI, and a recognition that foreign-born workers are critical to the U.S., we could see more opportunities for individuals with STEM degrees. So there could also be an increase in the number of H-1B visas, which would be so welcome to have more than the 85,000 we have right now, as well as expanded job portability, which would help with temporary workers and those in the green card process. And there will also likely be more whistleblower protections. So a Democrat-led government means that it will more likely than not be keeping a very close eye on businesses to ensure worksite compliance, get your I-9s in order. And we would also expect increased worksite enforcement of labor laws, which employers should be ready for.
As you mentioned, Kimberly, at the outset, immigration laws will also be impacted depending on a change in the political balance in Congress. So even if President Biden wins in November, if Republicans control the Congress, what do you think we should expect?
Yeah, so in that situation, I think we would see a continued focus on implementation of immigration measures that don't require congressional action. So that typically means executive orders and proclamations and issuance of new regulations by federal agencies. We also probably will continue to see some shifts through agency memos and policy updates that are not as sweeping, but still may have positive impacts on the way that immigration petitions and applications are processed. For example, we expect that this would include the Department of Labor's expansion of Schedule A occupations, which makes the permanent resident process quicker and easier for certain occupations, which at this time include professional nurses, physical therapists, and then individuals demonstrating exceptional ability in the sciences or arts. And by the end of this year, we will likely see an expanded stateside visa renewal program, which would alleviate the burden on U.S. consulates abroad and make it easier for sponsored employees to secure visas before they leave the U.S. That in turn will be a huge benefit, not just for the employees, but also for the employers. They don't have to worry about someone potentially getting stuck abroad for weeks at a time. We also hope to see a modernization of the adjustment of status application regulation, as well as an expansion of eligibility criteria for employment-based benefits and a reduction of case processing times. So there's a lot that we expect in terms of making immigration a more efficient, better run system, even though it's not going to be perfect. But there's going to be what we're perceiving to be more opportunities for those who are in the United States or for those skilled workers that we desperately need to come into the U.S. for various jobs. So without strong Democratic presence in both chambers of Congress, we won't expect to see immigration reform, which we really do need very badly. What we've been pushing for immigration reform with our National Day of Action, Miki, you and I, for years now. And if we don't have a Democratic Congress, we probably are not going to see that immigration reform. So there are definitely things that the administration can do to keep moving immigration benefits forward. All right, so putting the Biden administration aside, let's turn to reading the crystal ball if there is a Trump .2 administration. So what would you anticipate in his second term, Miki?
Yeah. So if Donald Trump is elected, I mean, I would say companies would want to be prepared for significant disruptions to the immigration system. We would expect some big negative impacts within the first 6 to 12 months, possibly even earlier, right? Within the first couple of months. I would recommend that companies start preparing proactive strategies now. Number one, by defining the population of your employee population that's most likely to be impacted. And then also for cases that can be, amended and extended now for non-immigrant visa options, I would say, HR and global mobility would want to look at that in the next coming several months before, potential new administration is in office. And then on the humanitarian side of immigration, unfortunately, we would anticipate that a Trump administration would institute the largest deportation operation in U.S. history. There is talk that he would leverage the National Guard. We would expect that this would create a bottleneck in the detention space, which means the result would be mass deportation camps. There would also likely be a repeal of some humanitarian-based immigration relief for things like temporary protected status for some countries, and even some visa categories like T and U visas that are for victims of crime could potentially be impacted as well. And then, in the employment-based immigration side, which historically normally has gotten support from both sides of the aisle, we know from the first Trump administration that employment-based immigration was also significantly restricted. So we would, anticipate, definitely would not rule out visa and travel entry bans. And based on prior bans, I would say this would likely impact countries like, Chad, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. Those were the countries that were first impacted last time. And then, it could also include Palestine as well. We don't know, obviously. These are just crystal ball readings. But I would say for companies, HR professionals, and global mobility to, warn the foreign national population that they might want to avoid international travel in the first half of 2025. That's even if they have visas that are valid and travel documents. Remember that in the last Trump administration, the travel ban applied to everybody who did not have U.S. citizenship or U.S. green cards. And so it didn't matter if people had valid travel documents. So that would be my advice. And then let's see, for employment sponsor cases like H-1B visas, the Trump administration would impose restrictions on H-1B visas. As people might remember, his administration had rolled out new H-1B regulations to do exactly that, right? And thankfully, the courts had struck those down, but we would anticipate that type of restriction to be resurrected again, with provisions to restrict H-1Bs to people who receive the highest salaries. And we wouldn't be surprised if, higher prevailing wages are instituted again. That did happen in the first administration. And that's for visas like the H-1B and also for perm-based, labor certification-based green card. And so, the picture looks kind of bleak. I mean, this would be very difficult for employers overall. Sorry for the dire picture painted here, but I think it's not a surprise.
Right. I agree with you, Miki, right? It was bringing back those memories of the administration in the past, right? With everything that we went through and everything that employers went through and our immigration partners, global mobility, departments, just coordinating and employees being completely stressed and anxious. And it really was, like you said, it was kind of grim, but we've been through it before. And it's our understanding, especially with some information out there, that, even in areas where the law has not changed, adjudication standards may be changed pretty quickly, because this would potentially be a Trump point two, where they've already had practice in the first time, the first administration. So there could be pretty quick change. Do you agree with that, Miki?
Yeah, totally. So, in the last Trump administration, we saw how political appointees kind of really focus on getting their career officials, bureaucrats, so USCIS officials and DOL officials kind of to adhere as much as possible to the presidency's political agenda. So, and in the last administration, it was Stephen Miller. And last time, there was a huge spike in requests for evidence and denials. And the background is that before the first Trump administration, there was a longstanding USCIS policy of giving deference to previously issued approvals for extensions if there was no new change, no new material change to the sponsored rule, such that the government would not apply a high level of scrutiny for those extensions. They wouldn't treat it like a new case that they really would have to review very closely. And so that policy was good because it was efficient. It made processing quicker, and it was an effective immigration strategy. And then in the first Trump administration, they did away with that deference standard. And so immediately upon taking office, President Biden reinstated that deference policy. If Trump is elected, the administration would likely repeal that policy again and reinstate that high level of scrutiny for all cases, as if, even for extensions, basically applying a standard of review as though it's a new filing. And so what that does is it's going to clog up the system again because it's going to result in a high percentage of RFEs and denials. Everybody probably has heard of the Republican plan in Project 2025's mandate for leadership. I'm not sure if a Trump administration without a Republican-controlled Congress would implement all of the provisions in that plan, but if that type of plan is implemented, this is going to further drastically change the immigration landscape for the worse. This plan basically envisions making E-Verify mandatory and permanently authorized. So that could be an administrative burden and a challenge for employers who really don't want to use it. It would also create a merit-based immigration system that awards visas to only those that get the highest pay and are the most educated. It would end DACA processing. And so it would result in at least, as you said, Kimberley, 500,000 DACA beneficiaries losing work authorization and legal protection. And here's a weird one. Basically, it would empower USCIS's fraud detection and National Security Directorate with a veto power over immigration petitions like H-1Bs. That sounds pretty scary.
Yeah. Oh, it does, right? An employer, they get the H-1B approval, and yay, it's the first, H, and then the second one is great. I can continue my job. And what would that look like? FDNS would just come in and say, I'm revoking this petition. That would create a lot of havoc. In my opinion. Yeah. So Republican administration would, based on the experience that we have and what we're seeing published at, with what might come of a Trump 2 administration, would also focus on immigration enforcement and protection of the U.S. labor market, which will result in more processing delays at USCIS, Department of Labor, and consular posts. So in the last Trump administration, the Buy American, Hire American policy had a significantly negative impact on companies who needed foreign skilled talent. So these policies were aimed at discouraging companies from hiring foreign workers. And it also brings negative impacts to the economy as well. I mean, we're all for America, right? And having a great workforce. And part of that is really bringing in these talented foreign nationals, but also those who are working in agriculture or temporary jobs that we don't necessarily have, U.S. workers to fill. So we just went through everything that if we had a crystal ball, this is what we're anticipating. And it is backed by some of the information that's coming out from Project 2025. But we've gone through all of this, Miki. What can HR and global mobility individuals actually do, or within their office, to prepare for something, either Biden or Trump 2?
This is what I'm telling my HR professionals in global mobility. First, audit your employee population. Hopefully organizations have a list of employees that have some type of temporary work authorization, especially given that most temporary workers require verification of their work authorization, as noted on the Form I-9. If a list doesn't exist, one option is to review the I-9 records to determine who those temporary workers are. And so that audit includes your company-sponsored foreign nationals, as well as those that don't require company sponsorship. So people that are on DACA, those dreamers, on temporary protected status and other humanitarian-based work permits. And it's really just important to be comprehensive and know your employee population. I know a lot of larger immigration programs will already have that pat down, but it's just good to reiterate that. And those people on DACA, TPS, and humanitarian work permits are those that are probably most at risk under a Trump administration. And then, second, do a self-audit, internal audit of your compliance program. So, such as ensuring that your non-immigrant sponsored visas don't require amendments, or were there changes to roles or location that wasn't reported to Global Mobility or HR? And now's a good time to take a look. And if they do require amendments, can you get more time so that you can seek the maximum available time now? And then, of course, audit your compliance files, especially for H1, PERM, and STEM OPT extensions and I-9 records. Even under a Biden administration, enforcement efforts are expected to increase. And so it's good to be prepared and take this time now to do that.
No, it's really, really good advice. And it's, be prepared for the worst and hope for the best, right? So starting now, because we have 6 months left in the rest of the year. So let's some time to get all the ducks in order. So I would also say, consider having a litigation attorney on retainer, right? Some companies have been hesitant to litigate in the past, but under a Trump 2 administration, this may be critical to ensuring that if faced with a denial of a petition, you are holding the government accountable based upon the correct interpretation of the law. We have a very strong litigation department here at WR, so let us know if you'd like to know more, but that is definitely something to have in your toolbox.
Totally agreed. Definitely. And make sure that, HR professionals and global mobility professionals are subscribing to our immigration updates on our website and LinkedIn. Check out our YouTube videos too, so that you can stay on top of changes in the law and trends. In the last Trump administration, there were, I would say almost weekly changes to the legal landscape. So if there is a Trump 2.0, you'll want to stay dialed in to all of the updates, and we can definitely help you with that. Before we let everybody go, I know we talked for a while, but wanted to wish everybody a happy Juneteenth holiday. Right after this, I'm planning to hop on over to the Museum of Fine Arts so that to hear Boston City singers, and they're going to sing spiritual and folk songs celebrating the holiday. Kimberley, are there any fun ways to celebrate in your neck of the woods?
There are, but what you have going on sounds pretty amazing and a lot of fun. Here in San Diego, we have several events, including a barbecue at La Jolla Shores and a Juneteenth celebration at the Gloria's Mesa Amphitheater, which is coming this Saturday. It will be filled with lots of fun music and entertainment, and it's for free. So come on out and join us.
That sounds
that's
awesome.
what we have going on. It's exciting.
Awesome. So everybody, join us next week for a discussion about using clawback provisions for employment contracts that basically are aimed at keeping employees, right, while they're on their visas and then after they receive their green cards.
Right. And if you don't already, please follow us on our LinkedIn page for WR Immigration, as well as our individual profiles. And wait, there's more. We also transcribe this live stream and post it to a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to. The link to subscribe will be in the comments. Good to see you today, Miki, and happy Juneteenth. And I'm looking forward to our conversation next week.
Thanks, Kim.